scientists determined that it would take a modification of 2 genes in each of those naturally occurring plants to turn them into cultivatable crops. Well, how on earth did that family suddenly chance on the technology that allowed them to do that? Instantly, it pops up all over the planet. Suddenly it's in India, it's in Europe, it's in Asia, it's in Africa, it's in South America. How did that happen? If Genesis 1 is really an expression of memory, what's being described is a planetary recovery. And I'm talking about the event that triggered the Younger Dryas cold period, the Clovis Comet. Amazonia, home to the world's richest and most biodiverse of ecosystems. Its lush rainforest produces a quarter of the world's oxygen, making it a vital natural resource to the whole planet. In my 20s, I was very privileged to spend some months exploring Amazonia, and what a beautiful part of the world it is. I remember watching the waters of the Amazon pouring out into the Atlantic Ocean, and the force and volume of that water is such that it remains a distinct body of water for 1,000 miles into the ocean. Of course, it's marked by plant life and debris that the waters carry with them, but most of all by the very distinct color, the yellow-brown clay soil of the Amazon basin. Now, that's the naturally occurring soil of Amazonia. And there is a night and day difference between that naturally occurring yellow-brown clay and the rich black Terra Preta that enabled the rainforest to become what it is today. It's bioengineered with such a beautiful balance that it's self-renewing. And it enabled Amazonia in the medieval period to sustain cities on a par with the size of London at that time. 14 miles long on either side of the Amazon, with buildings touching one another all across the continent from shore to shore. All built on this incredible leap forward, the type of soil we would do well to employ all around the world today. But the miracle of Terra Preta is that it is not a naturally occurring soil. It is an artificial soil. And the evidence is that it was bioengineered by man thousands of years ago. Now, where did that technology come from? Personally, I was never convinced by the explanation we were given at school that primitive man came down from the trees and then wandered around, gradually working out what he could eat. And I always felt a little bit unsatisfied by that story. I wondered, for instance, about the kidney bean. I mean, the kidney bean is poisonous if you pick it up off the ground and eat it. And so I imagined the scene where primitive man is wandering around, feeling a bit peckish, finds a little field of kidney beans, pick them up, eat them, and they all get terribly ill and are in terrible pain overnight, and maybe one of the elderly members of the tribe passes away. Now, which of those primitive people the next morning is going to say, what if we boil these for 12 minutes next time and then eat them? I just found that there was a gap in that story. There was a piece of the puzzle missing. But the lesson that the human race learned at Karca Dag is of a totally different order to simply learning how to eat. In the 1980s, I spent some time in Turkey, and standing in the vistas of its ancient cities, it's easy to know that you're in a deeply historical place full of sites of amazing archaeological interest. But what I didn't know at the time was that I was only 800 miles up the road from a place that has a unique importance in the human story, And it wasn't until the 1990s that we discovered it and realized that in that place was a turning point in the story of Homo sapiens. And I'm talking about Karca Dag. In the 1990s, teams from the Agricultural University of Norway in Ås and the Max Planck Institute in Cologne, Germany, found an area in the Fertile Crescent near the Karca Dag mountains in southeastern Turkey. It became clear that they had found a site of unique importance. Within this district, they found evidence of a number of cultivated foods making their first appearance on planet Earth. These foods included wheat, barley, peas, lentils, broad beans, chickpeas, grapes, olives, flax, and bitter vetch. And close by was the earliest evidence of the domestication of sheep, pigs, goats, and cattle. Bruce D. Smith, director of the archaeobiology program at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, said, "It is a remarkable congruence of plants and animals all domesticated in a relatively small geographic area, very early, a remarkable jackpot." No one knows who first cultivated these plants. The researchers speculated that it may have been a single community, perhaps a single family, who first stumbled on the idea of agriculture. Manfred Hoyne, the leader of the research team at the University of Norway, said, "I cannot prove it, but it is a possibility that one tribe or one family had the idea." Scientists determined that it would take a modification of 2 genes in each of those naturally occurring plants to turn them into cultivatable crops. Well, how on earth did that family suddenly chance on the technology that allowed them to do that and invent farming? And by what coincidence was it the same family in the same place that suddenly worked out the secrets of animal husbandry? Now, there are layers of explanation that little piece of history requires. Now, if that weren't arresting enough, that the great leap forward was achieved by perhaps one tribe or even one family in one place, and done so suddenly, and we don't just mean sudden in terms of against geological time, we mean one family, one tribe, and then instantly it pops up all over the planet. Suddenly it's in India, it's in Europe, it's in Asia, it's in Africa, it's in South America. How did that happen? That the leap forward happened here and then like that, after thousands of years of wandering around eating kidney beans and getting sick. There is a piece of the puzzle missing from that story. Take a look at the timing of that. This great leap forward occurs just as the planet was recovering from its most recent planetary cataclysm. And I'm talking about the event that triggered the Younger Dryas cold period, the Clovis Comet. The growing consensus among experts today is that the Younger Dryas cold period was triggered by a comet landing on the Laurentide ice sheet above the Great Lakes, just as Earth was emerging from an ice age. A black sedimentary layer all over North America, South America, Western Europe, and the western part of Asia bears dramatic witness to an ensuing conflagration encompassing hundreds of thousands of square miles, followed by catastrophic flooding. The canopy of dust and soot that resulted from the wildfires then blocked out the sunlight over the northern half of the planet. But hidden underneath the ice of Greenland's ice sheet lie the unmistakable contours of an impact crater. coupled with the cessation of the warming Atlantic current due to the invasion of meltwater into the ocean, the combined forces plunged the world almost overnight into an ice age even more severe than before, the Younger Dryas Cold Period. It was a time in the planet's history when the survival of Homo sapiens hung in the balance. The Greek philosopher Plato believed that human civilization gets reset to a virtual zero every 5,000 years or so, and he believed that this happened due to the movement of objects in space. And the word he uses for those objects could be a planet, could be a moon, could be an asteroid. I would suggest that this great leap forward speaks to our civilization, but not all civilization. Because just down the road from Karaca Dag is Göbekli Tepe, a site that was already in existence at that time, and it is a massive archaeological site, perhaps 50 times the size of Stonehenge when it's fully excavated. And it is an advanced megalithic structure representing an earlier civilization. If you go to India and look in the Gulf of Cambay, if you look off the shores of Japan and Malta, you can find the remnants of cities that would have been above sea level most recently 10,000 years ago, just before this lesson in agronomy at Karca Dag. So I think we're seeing there the passing away of an old civilization and the emergence of a new one in the story of Karca Dag. If the researchers from the University of Norway and the Max Planck Institute are correct in assigning the innovation to a single family or tribe, how did this advance in agronomy suddenly appear all around the world? This goes to the question of how we read our mythologies, because some like to read them in a fundamentalist way, almost as if they are diary entries, it's science, it's history, letter by letter, that's what happened. Others like to try and read them as if they were fables or moral tales, but there are very few of the ancient mythologies that can possibly work that way. You end up with a pretty strange morality if you read them that way. My reading of the world's mythologies tells me that they are vehicles of ancient memory. That's how I see them. Carefully crafted vehicles to carry a culture's memory. Well, what if we read the Genesis creation account that way? What if it is a report of something remembered? What is being remembered? In his writings, Plato spoke about entities that were not human who had been involved in the nurturing of Homo sapiens, and he called them children of God. And he didn't say what they were or where they were from, but that they had intervened in some way in the human story, particularly with an interest in human consciousness and human intelligence and human technology. In the Popol Vuh, which contains the creation narrative of the Mayan tradition, we hear of those who engineer arriving on planet Earth, and they're described as hovering over the dark planet that had been flooded with water, and they're discussing how to nurture an ecosystem and how to nurture sentient life. And in the Genesis sequence, I would argue that if Genesis 1 is really an expression of memory, what's being described is a planetary recovery. The planet is shrouded in darkness and flooded. And those who arrive, the powerful ones, as the text says, the Elohim arrive, they hover over the waters of the flooded planet, and they clear the atmosphere of this shroud of ash and dust and soot, just as there would be after an impact from something like the Clovis comet. And then they separate the waters, so there's salt water and fresh water. And incidentally, that's how the Sumerian narrative begins, the separation of fresh and salt waters. And then they nurture life in the oceans, and then vegetation, and then animals, and then sentient life. Could it be that the powerful ones arrive on planet Earth to help us in exactly the same way that we help one another when we go into countries after natural disasters? Could it be that the powerful ones came to help us recover from the world's most recent cataclysm, a near extinction level event? Another indigenous mythology that speaks of external intervention in human development is the Cherokee mythology. Its account is of egg-shaped craft arriving on planet Earth from outer space. People emerged from the eggs and taught the human beings how to farm and how to live as a human civilization. Having sat with the humans long enough to pass on this vital information to our story, the people of the cosmic eggs returned to their craft and returned to their world, a planet orbiting a star in the constellation Pleiades. It is the Cherokee's explanation, and it is a mythology that finds echoes all through Native American mythology and all around the world. I was very privileged to hear that story from a member of the Cherokee people. For me, this picture of these cosmic eggs visiting different parts of the planet with the same knowledge is a possible explanation why the leap forward occurred in Karca Dag and then suddenly here and here and here, and it pops up all around the planet. Many of the world's mythologies talk about an external intervention that helped us learn how to farm. Mbabwana Warisa comes and teaches Zulu people to farm and how to make beer. And that same connection is there in the Mesoamerican story, where the Mayans are taught about farming maize and then how to make beer. The world's earliest recipe for beer is from ancient Sumeria, who learnt their knowledge from the sky people. And then we have the Babylonian story of Oannes and the Apkallu, who come down to teach human beings all the rudiments of living as a civilization. All those mythologies identify sky people who came to Earth from another planet to intervene in human evolution and allow us to become the conscious, intelligent, technological species that we are today. Now, there may be layers in the story of external intervention in human history, and one has to ask where the knowledge of those interveners came from. But we might do better explaining the leap forward if we open ourselves to the possibility that in this process we had some assistance. We were not alone.
Author and researcher Paul Wallis probes the world's ancient mythologies for clues about the origins of the human race, and has published several books in the field of mysticism and spirituality. In the last decade, his work has probed the world's ancient mythologies for the insights they hold on our origins as a species and our potential as human beings. Paul's work in church ministry has included training pastors in the interpretation of biblical texts, working as a troubleshooter for communities of faith, and serving as an archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia. His background as a senior churchman makes it all the more surprising that Paul's latest book argues that human origins lie in our prehistoric contact with extraterrestrial species. Go to www.paulanthonywallis.com for information about Paul and his books. Escaping from Eden, does Genesis teach that the human race was created by God or engineered by ETs?